topic 1. Joe Rogan recently admitted in a tweet that a guest corrected him on the health risk associated with COVID vaccine, particularly for young males. Joe Rogan has been a major vector for vaccine skeptical doctors and personalities, and even has propagated the use of experimental drugs by using them himself when he caught COVID. It appeared he did a slight walk back of his earlier skeptical stances. Should pro-vaccine people cheer on this slight change in tune? Has Joe Rogan done too much damage to avoid criticism? What's the balance between healthy skepticism and dangerous misinformation? And I think that's actually the last part is the part that I'm most interested in, is that balance between like being a skeptic and promoting misinformation, right? Like you should always be skeptical, I think, right? That's something we should always encourage in our kids and our youth, right? And in our public discourse, to skepticism. But that can turn into something else, maybe a bit more dangerous. But where's the line, right? And has Joe Rogan crossed it? So yeah, we're going to go down the line, do opening statements with all these individuals. I'm going to take myself off screen. We got enough people here to handle this, right? And I'll step in, of course, as needed. I am going to put I'm gonna put GSU right there in the middle. Like I said, he's first of all, we need a black guy and always in the middle, right? So we're gonna keep that going. But he's gonna be the star of topic 2. So I'll put him in the central spot so you guys can easily attack him. Let's go. We'll start with so Wiggle, please.
Honestly, I'm just surprised that Joe Rogan survived. I mean, the fact that he got COVID, and he's still alive is a testament to part of his character. Maybe there is something to what he says. It surprises me that he's still able to tweet after like the damage that could have been caused to him. Other than that, I would the I hear what he says about like these big words like myocarditis, etc. I don't know what they really mean, but he's funny. So like I like what he says, and I think that he should continue doing what he does. And I think that he represents America. And I like that. Thank you.
All right. Let's go to Blay.
Yes, Joe Rogan, proud shining symbol of freedom of America. Am I right? Am I right, ladies and gents? Well, I guess all of you are gents, but either way, if Joe Rogan
dangerous assumption to make.
It most definitely is. I regretted it the second I said it, but I will continue with if Joe Rogan is becoming less and less skeptical of the coronavirus and the vaccine and all of the stuff surrounding it, I think that's probably a good thing, at least for me, who's on the left. So generally speaking, I think the left should embrace Joe Rogan with open arms. He's got an incredibly large platform, and I would much appreciate that he, holds an opinion that I think is correct, at least. So, I'm all for endorsing and taking people who want to change their opinions onto the left. I'm not going to gatekeep you from the left, despite what the flag may suggest behind me. So, I guess I'll just, I'll pass it on over from there. Godspeed.
Freemz.
Yeah, so I feel like just because he said like one good COVID thing doesn't mean we should be like, yo, Joe's good now. He could go right back on next week and bring on some doctor that starts saying COVID's fake and talks Joe into it, and then, which I mean, I'm being hyperbolic, but if we start giving him like credibility now and being like, oh, Joe's good now, gonna have more people be more opening to listening to him. I feel like if he keeps going this route though, sure, eventually I would be fine with like, well, yeah, Joe's a good source for this stuff, but it's not like a Twitch streamer doing like bad platforming. He has like millions and like tens of millions of viewers, so I think he's got like 3 times the viewership of Tucker Carlson, right? Is that what I heard? Something like that.
Pretty sure.
Back up, but,
I think it's
more than 3 times. Yeah, I don't know. He's got a huge viewership, so I think we should stay skeptical for now, just because he walked back one small thing on one show.
Thank you so much. Next, Scott.
Yeah, so I think the fact that we're even having this conversation is really dangerous and shows just how far our culture and our values and our ethics have fallen. The idea that the left can decide what narratives are acceptable and what science is acceptable, and can use science as a means of a political weapon and tool, picking and choosing what narratives they choose to preach, and then say that you must meet these, the Trusted News Initiative, for example. You guys don't know about that. It's basically a bunch of media organizations and all the large social media organizations working together and being paid by Canada and the United States and the UK to disseminate COVID misinformation is what I would call it. But to try and stop this fake news from coming out, and to try and silence and censor the fact that doctors are up in arms because Joe Rogan dared to talk to someone that has a different opinion, that is obviously well credentialed and is willing to back up their sources in some degrees, and is obviously wrong in some other areas. The fact of the matter is that the only COVID misinformation that is occurring thus far in any large scale is those that the left believe in. And that's why, Gallup polls regularly show that 98% of the left overestimate the dangers of COVID, as well as 84% of Republicans. Because there's that much fear mongering and misinformation from the major news media outlets, and because people don't actually understand the science, and anything that goes against the narrative has to be stamped down as this evil thing, and we have to talk about whether or not we should deplatform somebody. It's anti-free speech. It's anti-enlightenment and rational values. I think it's disgusting that anybody would even hold the opinion that they should silence somebody because, they have a duty and a moral responsibility to trust whatever it is their opinion is. And I find it sick, disgusting, and evil that anyone would hold that opinion.
Thank you. Once again, Scott, he's shy about his opinions, right? So you got to draw him out of it. Hopefully later on today we can get him to talk. So let's go to Gambit.
It was so funny because when you added me to the DM group, I said, "Yo, Scott actually has to be on my side to hold to his values today." So this is awesome. Yeah. So I want to echo a lot of what Scott said. It's disgusting that we've got to the point where certain political parties think that they are the barometer for which topics should be discussed and which information should be shared. I think the idea that Joe Rogan has met with epidemiologists and virologists from Harvard, from Yale, from some of our most prestigious institutions. And these people, a lot of them have been practicing for decades. The idea that these people should be deplatformed is radically insane to me. I think the better way to handle this is, if you think that what these people are speaking is misinformation, then you should cover the topics that they cover and speak specifically to the data, like what it seemed like happened when Joe Rogan said, "Hey, this guy showed me that myocarditis is a bigger risk due to COVID than due to the vaccine." So I think this idea that anybody who's skeptic is like impervious to change is ridiculous. I think it's anti-free speech. It's divisive because it means that we don't want Americans to communicate with each other. So I absolutely hate it, and I'm happy people like Joe Rogan exist that are outside of the control of either party or mainstream media, and we can get unfiltered views. And I would hope that people that are opposing his views will be willing to go into the show and defend themselves. So yeah, I think he's a net good for society. I think without him, I don't know how we have a better society. So yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm glad I'm not on this panel because then I'd have to fight GS Gambit. All right. Next, Scrawn.
All right. Yeah, it looks like Joe Rogan was caught with his pants down again. He is a specialist in two things: weed and MMA. Most people know this. He also did platform someone who called him out on his ignorance. I think that's a good thing because it shows his audience he's fallible. It's embarrassing for anyone to admit they're wrong, and it's clear as day he got embarrassed on his own show. Clearly, this is ammunition against his position in the future, and this pressures him to rethink and move his position in the future. That's a good thing, too. I prefer this happening to the opposite, where Joe Rogan is moving further toward a more ignorant direction. He could platform someone else. He could have gone further. Yeah, I think this is a mild win. What I disagree with is some people attacking him the way they do during his apology, because that encourages a person to double down. People don't just change their minds overnight. It's not easy to admit when you're wrong. Thankfully, there are also fans of his who do criticize him, yet aren't writing him off. And I think he can still be embraced at arm's length. Lots of people watch him only for the variety of guests anyway, so, if you want to combat him, you can just promote alternatives in that space. Like Lex Friedman or something.
Automatic pan.
Yeah, so I think you guys are looking at this a little bit in the wrong way. Obviously, on its own, this little change isn't very significant, but the fact that he's willing to say, hey guys, I got this wrong, shows that he is a person that can be approached, and if shown, the facts and the data, is capable of changing his mind. So I think that when we have cases like the 270 doctors that signed a letter saying he needs to be deplatformed by Spotify, I really do wish that instead of that, they had 270 doctors who were contacting Joe Rogan to try to go on his show and show where he was wrong. Because I do think that Joe Rogan is open-minded and might be willing to change his mind. He did recently also, I believe, change his mind on transgender individuals in sports, which is good. So I do think that he can change his mind on contentious issues. And I think that if we want to take people who are skeptical and change, their mind, obviously banning and deplatforming them plays into the skepticism. Now, it might be able to kill an individual channel. We've seen that deplatforming can kill individual channels and stuff. However, it does seem to me like these skeptical people will always be there, and if you kill one channel, there's going to be others. So the best way is to actually address the skepticism head on. Because the other thing is that what he's comparing to and why he's probably so sure of what he is because what he's basically competing against is the mainstream media. Destiny had this really informative video where he basically compared what Joe Rogan said about ivermectin to what CNN said about ivermectin. And to be blunt, Joe Rogan was more accurate about what ivermectin does than CNN does. And this is why people who are skeptical are, buying into these insane conspiracy theories, because basically what they're seeing is okay, well, CNN called it a horse dewormer. It's not a horse dewormer. It's authorized for use in humans. So I'm going to believe this other guy instead. I think the best way to combat misinformation isn't to try to ban them, but I think just showing the actual information that you have, not exaggerating, is very important, I think. And I think eventually you are going to change about as many minds as you're capable of changing. You might not change all of them, but you're going to change more this way.
Joe Lewis.
We can deal with it in the open pan, but the doctors didn't say what you described that they said, but we can talk about that in the open. Generally speaking, for me, like, Joe Rogan has used his platform to expose different people with different ideas and encourage critical thinking. I think in that quest, he's allowed people who may have nefarious intentions to spread propaganda to a wider audience. And there's a bunch of examples of that, right? Alex Jones, Steven Crowder, Roseanne, Majid Nawaz, Edward Snowden, Bernie Sanders, Elon Musk, Yomi Park, Steven Crowder, Gavin McInnes, the list goes on and on. This is across like over almost close to 2,000 episodes. But I just want to make something kind of clear. Like, when I talk about propaganda, I'm talking about information used to promote a specific political cause or perspective, but propaganda is not exclusively within the political spectrum. So I kind of want to make that clear. Then also, when I'm talking about critical thinking, it's just the idea of seeking new information and this take particularly facts contrary to your own to help form a better perspective on an issue or situation. With that being said, propaganda is neutral. However, due to the nature of propaganda, you can use it in a way to omit information that would contradict the message of something you're trying to convey. Because of this, omission is that misinformation that can exist within propaganda. And I think it's not too far-fetched to say that misinformation is antithetical to what critical thinking is striving to do. Currently, Spotify has no policy concerning misinformation on platforms for podcasts. Generally, you could see this not being an issue before Joe Rogan. because Spotify never had any content that forced them to prioritize the creation of such policy, or even to look into that because of how they navigate within exclusive content. For me, I think that having a policy very clear about navigating misinformation would be a net good, especially considering that Joe Rogan has like 11 million viewers per episode. Because having a clear policy on misinformation could help protect Joe Rogan for his quest for like critical thinking and a deeper understanding of issues with diverse individuals, but also for his audience who are looking to pursue that goal as well. So like generally, I think a lot of you kind of just missed the ball on it. Like I think generally Spotify should have a policy concerning misinformation. There's a bunch of ways they can go about it, so maybe we can talk about that in the open.
11 million.
11 million and 5, right? Just we gotta be honest and not spread disinformation. So
look, 11 million. I'm weeks away from catching up to this guy. He's not that big of a deal. All right, let's go to Doobie.
Yeah, so I think that it's a good thing that he's admitted that he was wrong about some things. I don't follow Joe Rogan, so I don't really know like what the extent of the quote unquote misinformation he's put out is. But I think that I think it's healthy to be skeptical about things, right? I remember seeing something from him where he was like, oh, if I'm a healthy 21-year-old, or if a healthy 21-year-old asks me if they should get the vaccine, I'm going to tell them no. I think that's pretty irresponsible, right? Given that his audience is full of like young dudes. But that being said, I think there's been a lot of like really irresponsible shit said by the media, right, and by the government, right, that they've also had to walk back on. And I think that both sides of this have like pushed to the extremes of their recommendations, right? Don't get it at all because it's always dangerous. The vaccine, I mean, or the virus is going to kill you immediately if you get it, right? It's just been fucking crazy, and it's really difficult for the average person to follow along. So I think people do need to be more careful when you have like we're talking about things that are impacting public health, and beyond that, that it's a good thing that he's changed his mind. I mean, that shows at least that he's not engaging in a skepticism because he's like bad faith, or he just is trying to pull in anti-vaxxers for his audience. If he's willing to say publicly that he was wrong about something, it tells me that he's probably skeptical because he's skeptical and he's a skeptical person who wants to look at all the shit for himself, which is fine, I think.
Thank you so much. Open to the panel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to.
Okay, go ahead.
I wanted to say first and foremost that like it doesn't seem like he's stayed by the opinion that he's wrong. Like on his Twitter, he's retweeted everybody's comment that says that he was actually right, and then he posts an article and talks about how he's happy that he was corrected, but this is why he was skeptical, and posts an article in his tweet talking about like exactly what he was discussing, and then he keeps retweeting a bunch of different sources, being people that are saying, oh, Joe Rogan's actually correct, and this is an example of how much humility he has, and that he's able to admit that he was wrong, and then even though he was in the right, and it shows how much of a great person he is. And he's been retweeting Storm, like all of these people's comments, etc. It doesn't really seem like he's held to saying that he was wrong in any sort of fashion. And I think like this is indicative of like the greater issues, like media in general, is that you hear something, which is the big storm, and then everybody like runs off of that, and then the story is less sexy, and then you don't go back to look more into it. So everybody hears Joe Rogan apologize and goes along with it, and then you don't look back at the Twitter and see that this guy didn't really apologize. He just held his ground, and it's also really interesting there.
Well, it seems like I guess he did apologize, but now he's seeing other articles and he's looking at preprints, which you should probably never do, and saying, wait a minute, maybe I am right. I wasn't like completely like misremembering what I saw. I did see an article. I would argue that that's actually probably more the Guardian's fault for posting a preprint article, in their news section. But the other thing I wanted to say was Joe Lewis told me that I was actually wrong about the letter with the 270 doctors, and that's very possible. I didn't look too much into that, so I would appreciate it if he could tell me what they actually do say in it.
Yeah, it was. I'll just say they said, I have it up here. It says, quote, and this is the last thing that they said after building their argument with Joe Rogan. We, as undersigned doctors, nurses, scientists, and educators, thus call on Spotify to immediately establish a clear and public policy to moderate misinformation on its platform.
Wow, I've been muted this whole time. Jesus Christ, yo, Wiggle is just spreading misinformation. So first off, he did apologize, but second off, there are doctors that are coming out that are saying that Joe Rogan's
If I
opinion
apologize
was...
for slapping you in the face and then
No.
and
Okay,
then I
I'm
say,
gonna
well,
finish.
actually, it might have
I'll
been
let you
the
finish
right
because I
thing
was
to
on
do.
mute. So okay, I'll let you finish because I was on mute. So there are people that are looking at the data that are saying that, hey, what Joe Rogan said is actually factual, and he's retweeting that. So he's just putting it out there that, hey, there are people that are doctors that have been studying for several decades that are saying that what I said is actually true, and you can listen to this if you want. He didn't say, hey, I would he's spreading information like he should do. So I don't think there's a problem with that. There are multiple doctors that have looked at this, and there are people that have a different take than whoever the Zeps guy is that went on his show. So,
Yeah,
so
the
like,
the
problem
real
is the
issue
idea
here-
that he walked back to statement because he
The real well, you can
did
do that
he
if you
walk
get
it
new
back?
information. Hold on. So
He
here's
didn't
the
walk
real
back
issue.
the statement.
Here's
That's not
here's
true.
the real issue, right? So and this goes to say too, which is really interesting. This is the problem with so much medical disinformation that the news media gives to people, right? Is yeah, if you're a 21-year-old male and you're perfectly healthy, and Doobie said it's irresponsible that there's a
Yeah, that's crazy.
problem. That's a problem if you tell a healthy 21-year-old male not to get vaccinated, despite the fact that we have, yes, preprint and preliminary research that is stratified by Kaiser Northwest from the UK, and other people are finding this as well, that myocarditis is more likely from the vaccine than from COVID itself for men under the age of 40. Right. And that's the best available data that we have right now. That doesn't mean that COVID is necessarily safer. There's a lot of issues here. There's a lot of probabilities and in going into the future, which is why this entire idea that you want to stamp down on science that is against the narrative of your science is the absolute definition of being anti-science. What you are seeing is a lot of anti-science behavior and rhetoric from the left and from the news media institutions that is pushing right-wingers and conspiracy theorists to other anti-science people because no one is having a rational conversation about this. Well, some people are, but if you have a rational conversation, you might get banned off of Twitter or, get your shit algorithmically deranked by YouTube, and then CNN might do, or the AP might do, for example, a fact check of Joe Rogan saying that he edited his footage, even though it's very obvious that CNN edited his footage so that they could appear to make him look sicker, and anybody with two pairs of eyes can fucking see that. But the news media and the Trusted News Institute and the UK, Canadian, America government that pay these news media outlets to spread lies and misinformation are doing a bang up job.
Well,
I
even
gotta say
more,
that
even
Doobie-
even
hold on, hang on,
with
respond to
the
that. Can I hold on, Doobie, hold on, Doobie. I got you, man. Because we understand that the average Joe Rogan Experience listener is between I think it's something like 24 or 25. So Fabian, Washington State released a study that unvaccinated men, or boys, I should say, in the age of 12 to 34 are 12 times more likely to be hospitalized from COVID-19. So do you still stand by your statement with that information?
Hold on, wait. I wanna modify what you just said, Joe, because it's very important. The real thing that people don't talk about is in all of these studies where they talk about certain groups having bad time with COVID, it's almost always people that have 4 or more comorbidities or people that are extremely deficient in certain vitamins. So
There's
it's
a
not
couple of
true
things.
that
There's a couple of things. 'Cause you asked me.
34-year-olds are 12 times more likely to be
Yeah,
hospitalized with COVID than those who
And
are
who?
fully vaccinated.
Right. So, and
Wait,
this
but
is
we
this
know
is
that,
why.
right?
No.
The
I was
point
called
was
out
about
specifically.
myocarditis.
No, I was called out
so-
specifically. So
Okay.
let me at least respond for a second, and then I'll let you guys have the floor. So for example, this is the problem with, and this is why I love that Mark Twain quote, right? There are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics, right? You can quote one statistic that shows
Yes.
and highlights a specific problem. I can also quote another statistic, which is a true fact. If you are under the age of 24, you are more likely to die from an aspirin overdose than you are from COVID. That's a fact. right? But that's by itself devoid of context is a meaningless thing. These are complex issues. There's a lot of data that has to be parsed out, and there's a lot of unknown variables. For example, antibody dependent enhancement, when you have a virus when you have a vaccine or an mRNA therapy that is not a sterilizing vaccine, this massively increases the risk that we have problems like RSV and dengue fever. There are a ton of issues, right? And there are a ton of little plot points and things. But when you start saying that it is somehow platform anybody that disagrees with the narrative, that disagrees with vaccine mandates or has some skepticism about vaccine efficacy, and you're saying that these are dangerous, that this is a misinformation, but you're okay with all of the misinformation that is on your side of the fence, is fucking absurd. It's anti-science and it's anti-free speech. So you're anti-liberal and you're anti-science, and I don't know why anyone would take or claim that position other than to cheer for their own team.
Yeah,
I'm
is
gonna
anyone
try this
here-
again.
is
Hold
anyone
on,
here
wait. I'm gonna
pushing
try this
the-
again. I'm gonna try this again. COVID-19 case rates among 12 to 34-year-old individuals are 3 times higher in the unvaccinated population than in the fully vaccinated population. Additionally, COVID-19 rates among 35 to 64-year-old individuals are 4 times higher in the unvaccinated population than the fully vaccinated population. With that being said, the hospitalization rates among 12 to 34-year-old individuals are 8 times higher in the unvaccinated population than in the fully vaccinated population. What do you do knowing this information, Fabian? Would
Wait,
you recommend
right.
somebody
Yeah.
in between
So
the
hold on,
ages of
Joe,
12 to 34-year-old
listen.
You
be
listen to Joe
vaccinated?
Rogan.
No,
So
no,
you
listen,
have-
Joe.
so you're
Gambit,
asking-
No, but here's the
Hold on,
thing.
hold
They
on.
were talking
Let me
specifically
talk.
about.
talking to
They were
Fabian.
talking
This is
about.
Joe
man.
Rogan's a
This is a
beacon of truth.
grown-ass man with 2 kids. I am sure, Gambit, he can answer the question for himself. I promise you.
Yeah,
Right,
but I don't
so,
think you're listening
again,
to him. So
no-
go ahead.
I can defend myself. I got this, right? So, but I
That's why I said it.
appreciate your fervor. I appreciate your fervor nonetheless. Yeah. So again, this is why I said there are lies, damn lies, and then statistics. You're taking one statistic, which is increased hospitalization
I
rates.
gave you 3, and I gave you a study.
Okay, sure.
I'm
Right.
asking you. I'm going to try this again, Fabian.
I don't need you.
What
I don't need you
do
to talk
do-
down to me after
what
you
do
avoided and
you-
pivoted the entire
What do
conversation.
you do with
I don't
the
need your bad
information
faith
that
shit.
just
I heard you the
presented?
first time.
I
I heard you the
problem-
first
The
time.
problem is you're not
Just
answering
because
the
you
question.
don't like, okay, well, you didn't fucking answer it to any of the things that I said, and then you essentially
Because it had
repeated
nothing
yourself.
to do with what I said. So why should I humor what you're saying, but doesn't engage with what I'm saying? I'm asking
You're not
you
the arbiter
again,
and you're not the moderator.
What do you do
So if you
with
wanna
the
call me out,
information
you
that
want me to
I
answer the
presented to
fucking
you?
question.
I'm not trying to call you out. I just want you to answer my question.
God, you're
Why
such
is
a
this so
fucking
hard on the
He
internet?
didn't even dispute
Wait,
the. I
so
don't
hold
think he
on, so
disputed the
he-
information.
I'm
right?
not
Like,
disputing the information at all, Joe Lewis, and I'm attempting to answer your question. But if I say anything that strays upon your fucking narrative, you want to fucking cancel
There's
me.
no,
like you
I'm
wanna
not
cancel
trying to
Joe
do a
Rogan.
narrative of trying to cancel you. What the fuck is
Can I-
wrong with you, you
can I
paranoid
please-
fuck?
can I-
Like,
okay, guys.
go for it, Doobie. Go for it. Go for it.
Um,
I
Holy
can
shit.
answer your question.
So
You
Scott,
let
yeah, it's just really quick. So, so what Joe said, but also, there are long-term health impacts, right, related to COVID, right? Including like brain issues, even long-term depression, anxiety, dizziness, right?
In the population we're talking
lung
about, it's
problems,
extremely right.
lung problems, right? Even organ damage from the organs becoming inflamed during their COVID, right?
Doobie, how often does this
So wait
happen?
1 second. But it doesn't matter how often this happens. We're
Yes, it
talking about a
does.
country
That's
of millions,
very important.
hundreds of millions of people, right? It's going to happen to some of these people. So if you have an audience of young people, impressionable people who trust you, right? You pointing to the higher rate of myocarditis, right? That's true, right? This happens, but all this other shit happens if you have a bad case of COVID, and you're way less likely to have a bad case of COVID if you get the vaccine, right? So you're saying, oh well, hey, if you get COVID, and you're unvaccinated, you won't get the increase of myocarditis. You're gonna get all this other shit, right? So
Okay,
if you were to weigh
that's
these
not-
things,
no,
if you were to weigh
that-
these things, I think it still makes way
This is
more
not-
sense to tell these people to get vaccinated.
No,
and
you're making-
you throwing up this one stat on the other side as if it just discounts
You're
all
doing
this
this-
shit is
Doobie,
ridiculous.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. What you're doing
Yeah.
is you're taking things and then you're creating causal links, and you don't know that, right? Like even the scientists are currently still debating this. So, for example, right, one of the issues is we may or may not, right, have what was essentially attempted to be a bat vaccination, right? That leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology that has specific spike proteins that have been added to, and other structures that have been added to the original SARS virus, right? We're not exactly sure of the structure, but what we do know, right, is that the vaccine is based off of a select grouping of spike proteins from the Alpha variant. Now that we're in Delta and now that we're in Omicron, we have no idea what the long-term side effects of Omicron are. It is very possible, though it is possible in both directions, right, that the long-term side effects of a bad case of symptomatic Omicron is better than getting vaccinated. Like, there's a lot of things here that we don't, there's a lot of science here that we're unsure of. We have best guesses based off of the science. The problem is that you're engaging in probability, right? And then and by doing so, you're saying, okay, well, the science seems to point in this direction. But the problem is that the science that is against that direction, that has other ideas, is consistently being silenced. And that's part of the fucking conversation that we're having today.
It's being silenced in the media, but it's not being silenced in academia. All of these studies are getting admitted, right? Like, when we talk about the suppression of these counter ideas, Fabian, we're not talking about like papers being published. I'm pretty sure. Well, I'm not pretty sure. I am sure that in academia you're allowed to. You are allowed to post papers that are contrary to the popular consensus.
It's harder to get funding for those things, but yes, you're allowed to do them. Yes. Okay. It's more difficult to fund research that is counter to a narrative of the state, because the state often writes much grants for research, right? And sometimes the state can be picky and choosy about that, but that's neither here nor there. The problem is there's a lot of scientific data out there, and the idea that you can take one thing about hospitalization or one thing about long-term COVID effects, and then you're using data that is mostly based off of Delta and Alpha variant without even looking at the fact that we don't have data on the Omicron, which is more transmissible and is what is surging currently, is absurd. It's just not scientific. And the idea to say that people are.
Do you think it's
bad?
Oh God.
No, wait, hold on. This is the part
you're engaging.
I don't do, but you talk like 10 times. Okay, so the thing is, this is what's crazy.
He did
So
talk
once.
if I know, I just wanted to make him stop, and he stopped. So I was going to use that. But so if I have 12 cents and Joe has 1 cent, I can say, yo, I have 12 times the amount of money as Joe, right? But like, what does that actually mean? And that's the problem when we quote some of these studies where it says, hey, this group is X% more likely for hospitalization. If you don't give the actual rates, you can scare anybody. Oh my God, you're like 300 times more likely to die, when it's like a 0.001% chance that you'll die. Like, and that's the problem with, and that's what Fabian was trying to like appeal to when he said like, there's facts, lies, and statistics. You can use statistics to paint whatever picture you would like. People from 15 to 24 are less, if I remember correctly, are less likely to have a severe case of COVID or die than fully vaccinated older populations. So like when you say, oh, I'm going to compare 15 to 24 with the vaccine to 15 to 24 without the vaccine, of course there's going to be some disparity if the vaccine works. I hope all of us believe the vaccine works. Fabian, you said something I kind of disagree with, but if the vaccine works, of course there's going to be some statistical factor that you can lay out that says that the unvaccinated are going to have a worse time. But how much worse of a time is the discussion? And if it's the difference between playing the lottery cash 5 and playing the Mega Millions, it doesn't really matter when people are making their own personal decision on whether or not they want to be vaccinated.
Yeah, I guess the takeaway from this is, wait, I want to get into
hold on. Okay, hold on. I gotta let Doobie in. I gotta let Blay in. I gotta let
You don't have to.
Oh, it's true.
It could just talk over him.
I can. Then I'll let Freemz. Do you have something to say? Doobie, Blay, Freemz, and then back to Joe Lewis. Okay. Oh, and Scrawn. I didn't see your hand. Sorry.
Okay. So it's true that the Omicron variant is the one that's in the news right now. That doesn't mean that all the others that we know have these negative impacts long term aren't still around. These are still around. They're infecting everybody. It's not like they just disappeared the moment Omicron showed up. Right? These are all active at the same time. So people still need to protect themselves from those variants, right? That are still floating out there infecting people right now. So that's more reason to get the fucking vaccine. And as you're saying, we don't know that the long-term health impacts of Omicron might not be as bad as a vaccine. We don't know if they're worse. So I don't know
I
why
would
you're
say
willing to
it's
gamble.
unlikely that
Why
it's
you're willing
worse.
to gamble? Wait, hold on. You're willing to gamble first off that these people are going to get specifically Omicron and not any of the other variants that we know have terrible long-term health impacts for a lot of people. But in addition, you're gambling that the Omicron variant is not going to have those long-term health impacts and that they're not going to be much worse than the others.
Dude,
gambling no matter
Which
what
makes
you
no
do.
sense.
95.4%.
Gambling no matter
Hold
what
up,
you
no,
do.
95% of cases and growing are Omicron. So I think that is a fair point to make. Now, honestly, I think we should be cautionary. I think that there is a reason to believe that this could likely have long-term side effects, just like the other variants. However, we can't just say that, oh, well, they might still catch the original variant. Like, obviously, there's not that much of the original variant going around. We have to recognize the fact that Omicron is what the vast majority of people are going to be dealing with. And in fact, the vast majority is 95.4% and growing. That was like of 2 weeks ago. So
The other thing,
I want to say
the other thing,
hold on,
real quick, I'll be
problematic.
super quick. I mean, it's just to add real quick. The other thing that's important to understand, just as a frame of reference, right, is that when you're talking about the vaccine, you're talking about the spike proteins, right? Selected spike proteins from the alpha variant. When you're talking about catching Omicron, Delta, and most of the mutation in Omicron occurred in the spike proteins. Now, when you get acquired immunity from an infection, be it from any variant, what you're talking about is the spike proteins, you're talking about the N proteins, you're talking about the epitoses, you're talking about the biolipid layer membrane, you're talking about several structures of the virus in which you produce antibodies for, right? So the overwhelming likelihood here is that if you catch Omicron, you are in many ways, you might think of it as like backwards compatible, right? If you catch Omicron, you are far more likely to be just as easily, if not more protected than the vaccine for Alpha variant and Delta. Now, that being said, Alpha and Delta are still out there. That is still what you could catch, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to add that little bit of information so that people understand like exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, let's go to Blay. It's Blay's turn, then Freemz, then Joe, and then Scrawn.
Yeah, look, I thought it was really important to point out that when we're talking about the vaccine, we're talking about recommending or urging that people do it. When I think of this, I'm not trying to censor people. I'm not trying to have people, like lawyers disbarred or doctors, have their medical licenses revoked. But what I think it's important to point out here is that when we're talking about this kind of thing, when you check just let alone on the Pfizer website, there is protection against Omicron. There's protection against previous variants. And when Joe was pointing out the statistics, right, when it comes to the vaccine is safe. It's been FDA approved. People have taken it with minimal side effects. It's not been very problematic in the world around us today. I think it's super important to point out that if I'm making a value judgment, the relevant information to me would be in regards to I can get this vaccine and it can protect me from the virus. If I am now not 12 times as likely to get ill from the virus, then I would absolutely much more rather get that vaccine regardless, because the consequence of me getting it and the side effects just aren't grave enough for me to be concerned with it. So if we're actually having a chat on the efficacy of this virus itself, stats and figures may all be, like lies or whatever Mark Twain said that you were quoting, but stats are still important when we're trying to make value judgments. With the information we receive, it's important to interpret it in a way that we can utilize to make the best decisions for ourselves and our safety. I don't think that that's not true in the slightest. I'm sure all of you agree with me.
Yeah, wait. So this is where me and Fabian maybe disagree. I for sure believe in almost all cases, the vaccine is going to be better than the side effects of contracting COVID on average. So I think me and Fabian may part ways there. I agree with the science behind the vaccine. But Dylan, to directly answer you, just because the vaccine does give someone more protection doesn't necessarily mean that a person might want to get that vaccine, right? There's two arguments. One, is the vaccine helpful, which hopefully all of us, maybe Fabian can't, but hopefully all of us can say yes to that. But then there's two, do I want to engage with medicine in a way such that I'm putting this in my body? Do I want recurring boosters, blah, 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 all of that stuff. And there are people that are going to say, yes, the vaccine is more helpful than being unvaccinated, but I'm not a person that wants to get the vaccine. And that's a totally coherent position to have.
For me, so I'm just gonna respond to that really quickly.
Okay.
when it comes to making like a value judgment on whether I want to get the vaccine or not, I think it's most important to consult your physician or talk to your doctor about it, right? Because obviously there's going to be cases where people get exemptions and things like that. And when it comes to you taking the vaccine yourself, I'd recommend that, you know, you probably heed the word of your physician. Of course, I've never once advocated for a vaccine mandate here thus far, and I'm not trying to push that. But what I am trying to push is that we need information about the vaccine to circulate, all of the stats, all of the numbers we can accumulate, all of the stuff we can remember, all of the stuff we can take to heart is definitely going to be better for us in the long run because it's going to help us make better decisions about our health and safety.
I agree,
No,
but I do think we need to be when the people who are traditionally, you know, vaccine skeptical say something that's correct, we need to acknowledge that. I know it doesn't change our overall point, but if we deny, you know, when they say something that's actually true, that's, in my opinion, what helps fuel a lot of this unwarranted skepticism. So like everything you say, Dylan, I believe is absolutely true, and I agree. But I still think there's reason to even publicly acknowledge that, hey, maybe myocarditis is a problem. Like, I actually don't know the science, but assuming that it is, we should acknowledge that, even if it doesn't change the overall recommendation that everyone should get the vaccine because it's safe, the side effects are very minimal, blah, blah, blah. We should still acknowledge when the other side has points, because if we don't, that's going to look like we're trying to hide something. And if it looks like we're trying to hide something, that's when these skeptics get all cemented in their anti-vax position.
Right, so I completely agree.
Can Scrawn please go?
Yeah, for sure.
It's actually Freemz' turn. It's actually Freemz' turn.
Oh, let's go Freemz first.
Yeah, Freemz.
I'll make it quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, I'm like way past the point of trying to talk people into getting the vaccine. I also think if you're, I don't know, dumb enough to listen to Joe Rogan, then that's on you. I'm gonna push back against the stupid shit he says every time I hear it, and anyone who repeats it, I'm gonna push back against it as well. I'm not trying to cancel Joe Rogan or silence Joe Rogan, but I'm going to push back against what he says. He's had a history through this whole COVID thing of saying shit that's just false. At one point, he said they're going to put microchips into your body he said Alex Jones was correct when he said that they're going to put microchips in your body to find out if you had COVID or not. He said lockdowns are bad because people have to stay inside because that's where it spreads, is inside. Just shit like that. And I hear people repeat this stuff even now. Huh?
You're conflating a lot.
This is stuff that he said.
Hold on, wait. 100% true, though. Because once I got the vaccine, my testicles tickle every time I cough.
No, wait. There's a difference between the people who are idiotic enough to believe that the vaccine has a microchip inside of it, which is the argument that you're trying to appeal to, and people saying that the government is so tyrannical with the government, with the vaccine mandates and blah blah blah, that they gonna try to control people. Those are two different arguments, and you specifically referenced it in a way to be bad faith to try and act like it was the microchip.
Hold on, no, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. I'm reading off of a list right now of all the negative.
Okay, well, understand the context of the list that you're reading off of. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's the
Wait. So if they did microchip
you, be saying that to 11 million people.
Wait,
so again,
microchip you.
I'm repeating what he said.
Can you put
the link?
He's talking.
I can't hear all of y'all at one time.
Freemz. He's not talking about them putting microchips in the vaccines, right? They're talking the way that Alex Jones often talks.
Even eliminating that one. What about the other shit? What about the other
listen,
shit? Dude, don't tell me to listen. I know what you're gonna say because
you're trying to stop me from debunking you because you realize that you said something false. So I just want to correct it real quick.
No, Joe Rogan did he not say that? Did he not say that?
Listen,
then it's not false.
Listen. They were talking about the fact that there are Swedish startup companies where people are starting to put microchips in their hands voluntarily, and the government is funding and supporting the idea of putting microchips in people for their vaccine passports. They're not talking about microchips being injected via the vaccine, and you're conflating the two. They're talking about people that have actually been given for free by the government vaccine passport microchips in their hands. That's what they're talking about.
He's talking about something that the Pentagon. He said that the Pentagon is funding that. It's a
Pentagon funds all kinds of shit like that.
A microchip with an antenna that can detect COVID-19.
What an answer!
That is a real thing he said. You didn't debunk.
Do you have a
shit.
link? Do you have a source for that?
Yeah,
I'll read it.
I feel like
I'll post it in Prom's chat.
But
even if you remove that, like the other shit, he's still saying a lot of false shit. A lot of people.
I agree, but that's kind of where you lose
I feel
here, right?
like both you, Fabian and Gambit, but I feel both of you guys would agree though, that if they microchipped people in passports, you would call that some form of tyranny. So like, why was there
Yeah.
disagreement? Like, why would you say that specifically Gambit, when Freemz was creating this kind of like construct with what he was saying, that's what you were saying. Why would you distance those two? You said that it's different. Microchipping would be different than the idea that there'd be a
Wait,
tyranny.
wait,
There would be a
Wiggle.
tyranny. Yeah.
Wiggle, do you know that there's a group of people, unfortunately, that exist in our society that think the microchip is embedded in the vaccine that they're delivering to people?
Yeah, I feel like I listen to them every time I go on these panels.
Yeah, so well, I haven't been on. Luckily, I
Yeah,
think I haven't been on the panel with those.
Luckily,
people,
I've
but,
never met one.
but yeah, I think it's important to clarify the conversation that was happening when somebody spouts off a list that they may not understand context for.
But wouldn't you also believe that it's important to let Freemz finish his whole
I
statement?
did let him finish.
Right, but the Pentagon,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Pentagon
got
stuff
off
that he's,
halfway through it.
the
It's like,
Pentagon
oh,
stuff that he's
my
talking
bad if
about
I
is
cut you off.
patents for this technology that the Pentagon apparently filed. So
And
yes,
not
they
just that-
filed patents for that technology.
And not just
Sweden is using
that, I feel like it's important to note that I think Scott was just trying to add context to the actual particular remark that was being made there, which is more important when we're having these conversations. I'm
okay,
sure
I get
all of
that,
us are in agreement, right? I'm sure all of us are in agreement.
I felt like they took the one thing that they could take to change my narrative.
Listening,
Well,
up-
because to be fair, that was by
What was the
far
biggest
the
thing?
most egregious. That was if
Yeah,
it's
that was
true
the
that
most
Fair
drastic
enough.
thing,
if
right?
it's true
And
that
then I
Joe
said-
Rogan
and then
was
I said-
actually
and then
no,
I
no, no,
said-
hold up. If
and
it was
then I
actually
said
true,
remove
no,
it.
no, 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 no.
Because now you're doing the same
Hold up.
fucking thing.
Hold on, yeah.
If
He
it was
agrees, and let's hear the rest of his
I
list.
feel like if he was Joe Rogan, you would let him finish his statement.
Yeah. Here's the thing.
I probably would.
I actually, for the most part, like Joe Rogan's podcast. I've been listening to it.
No,
probably
but
for
what was the
about
other
5
thing?
years. But what the other things on the list, even if you remove the microchip one, talking about people should the lockdowns are bad because if people stay inside, they're going to get COVID more because that's where it spreads.
Yeah,
that
well,
was
I
one of the
agree
things
with
he
Wait,
said.
hold on, wait. I don't think
we
he's-
agree that the other stuff is
That
wrong.
wasn't
We're just
said.
saying that you can't label all of these things
Right.
together because
Okay,
one
and
of
I-
these
okay,
sounds
and I
extremely
agree.
crazy.
Yeah, hold on.
Throw the
They
bad
have
in
different-
for the good.
They have
No,
different
wait,
values for which one's worse.
Are you
Right, but the
okay with
reason
us going
we
point by
mentioned the other
point?
ones is 'cause we
Hold on,
didn't
hold on,
listen
hold on,
to
wait. Hold on, wait.
Let
wait.
him go.
let him
Do
go.
we need to
Go.
go point by point on
Okay.
this? I mean, I think we can just say that Freem's position is unpopular on that, right? And we can let him continue.
But it's important to understand why. The thing is, there's epidemiologists that exist that say that there could be bad effects to the shutdowns, and those could have been more harmful than COVID itself. Now, I don't necessarily agree with those people, but that's what the claim was, and that claim came from a epidemiologist that's been studying for several years. That claim didn't come from Joe Rogan. I just want to bring context to the stuff that you're saying.
I get you. Okay, so I want to add this as well. Do you believe that there are people who think that there is microchips in the vaccine, or that
Yes.
they're trying to put Okay, so
I hear it online, but I haven't
to the
run
point,
into anyone in the
to
wild.
the point where doctors
My
had to
mother
go on the
believed
news
it,
and
and
show
she
Which
them
is
told
why
me
I
the
had
day
to
she
correct you.
died.
Yeah, for sure.
They do
for sure.
exist. Let's just acknowledge it and let him continue.
Whenever people are already thinking that, and then Joe Rogan repeats it on his podcast,
He didn't
regardless-
repeat that. That's what.
regardless-
No, that's why we had to attack you
He
because
said
you're
Alex
engaging
Jones
in
is correct.
bullshit.
He
But
didn't
yeah.
repeat that. He
You
You
didn't
had to
never
add
said-
context to what you said because what you were saying was this. You tried to
Yeah.
frame it in such a way that he was like this kook talking about microchips and vaccines, and we're like, no, we're talking
no,
about the
that's-
fact that
that's
the
totally how
Pentagon
Joe Rogan
is
would
putting.
Specifically interrupted you so you wouldn't do what you're trying to do now.
Right.
This is crazy. I
Like, it's a bad
specifically
thing.
interrupted you for this reason, and then you said, "I listened to y'all." Now hold on, wait. Don't you think?
Also,
those
he
people
said he
that-
doesn't listen to Joe Rogan, and then said I actually listen to Joe Rogan. So I mean,
No, I don't
Well,
listen to
no,
Joe
that's-
Rogan. I don't listen to Joe Rogan when it comes to COVID. I listen to
Oh,
Joe
okay.
Rogan when he has on people like Duncan Trussell and
Yeah, hell
Linda
yeah.
Walsh, people like that.
I think that's fair.
Yeah,
Fight
I'm a big
Companion.
stand-up comedy fan.
I mean,
right,
did
so-
anyone catch him talking
So we
to
understand the
GSP?
importance of context and nuance.
I
This is all
want
we
I,
were trying to do.
I want to let in Scrawn
Okay,
because he
Brian.
hasn't had a chance
Yeah.
to speak, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
we'll go back to Joe Lewis.
Yeah. So far, I totally agree with problematic Pan's takes. Down the line, I think I agree a bit with GSU, Gambit, and Fabland, but I want to be clear. I do lean toward respecting the mainstream science narrative more. Like Joe Lewis and sorry if I get the name wrong, Joe Lewis, and Doobie a bit.
Joe's fine, yeah.
Yeah, and GSU Gambit did clarify that he was toward that, respecting some more of the mainstream as well. I agree. There is, again, with GSU Gambit, there is some nuance to acknowledge for why people might be vaccine hesitant, or be trying alternatives to medication. So we want to keep in mind people are not necessarily anti-vax among like the broader anti-vax crowd. Some people are just vaccine hesitant. We do get people who are like, hey, I want, FDA approval and all that stuff. And that's being some of it, and they get caught up on all kinds of stuff. But anyway, I like what Problematic Pan said about acknowledging there might be some problems people perceive of mainstream medication and tackling those. So some people need to be conceptually brought to the point where they'll roll the dice when they're afraid of, oh, there's like a 0.1% chance of some long-term problem with a vaccine, right? Like some people, it might be enough that they're just like, you know what, I'll take that risk, and you want to bring them there. I do want to bring it back to Joe Rogan a bit. I'm also fine here with what Joe Lewis was saying with the appeal for Spotify to do something, but that's up to Spotify. I think a lot of what Joe Rogan's tweeting about, what W Word was complaining about, was motivated by Joe trying to salvage status under hate more than, okay, there's misinformation in the hard attacks against him too, right? Let's check ourselves on the toxic masculinity on all sides. There's a problem with people dredging up the Ivermectin thing against him. That optically tends to lack context for why Joe Rogan is wrong exactly, which is its own misinformation. So there's misinformation in the attacks against Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan may have like the misinformation of, being ignorant, but when people are criticizing him and saying, lol, Ivermectin, I don't think that's very helpful. There's still too much of the lol horse dewormer rhetoric out there. And trying to shout things down with that, I don't think is good. And so I want to touch on a little bit of like why some people might believe Ivermectin to work, and I don't agree. But the nuance, I think, for this in particular, I think is important considering Joe Rogan promoted it, is good to address. The main reason I've seen for why people believe Ivermectin to work is that in India, there was success with Ivermectin because being that it was an anti-parasite medication, it helped with some medication that was being used for COVID, which had the problem of causing inflammation and other problems in people who had parasites. And so in populations that had parasites as a problem, just the regular COVID treatment was actually causing problems. So Ivermectin with COVID treatment was actually good for those people. And from there, I think we need to appreciate that a bit more when we're criticizing people who are, just doing the less responsible drug cocktail approach of Joe Rogan. But to see why...
Sorry, that's just not scientifically true. Right, there have been a ton of studies on ivermectin. It's relatively inconclusive, right? The studies seem to suggest that it may work as a prophylactic, and that it may be more effective early in the treatment and not later. Like, so the idea that you're like seriously like infected and then you get ivermectin, there doesn't seem to be any studies that suggest any statistical significant difference with or without. There are a lot of studies, many of them are problematic, and we do not know as of yet. But saying that one study from India that helped in that one situation is the reason why people believe it. There are a lot of studies that
I'm saying it's a big reason for a
ivermectin.
lot of people, because that's something that I've seen that there are people on the left who will acknowledge that as well. Like I'm saying,
Right, and
where's the
it
wiggle room
also
for people to be believing that ivermectin is valid,
there's
right?
research that suggests that there are antiviral applications of ivermectin before COVID even existed, right? So the issue here is saying that it's like, oh,
Sure, but
this
that's not
one-
acknowledged by left-leaning people and people who are toward the mainstream science. Like
Right,
I'm
it's
finding
not
more mainstream
just that
support for saying, hey, actually, ivermectin, excuse me, is
it's also
helping
incredibly
these
low
people,
risk.
right?
Like
So the
there
point
have
though
ne-
is, I think the point though is for where I agree with Problematic Pan is to acknowledge, hey, if you're arguing against the people who are going for ivermectin, to at least acknowledge, okay, where you can from that left perspective.
Yeah, no, I'm just
I get that
pointing
you're
out that
on the other.
ivermectin still
Yeah.
may be a good drug to use, and that it's not just like pure fake news that it has
Yeah.
positive effects.
Well,
You-
and
you
I
see
want to
the-
add on. I want to add on real quick to what he was saying. That if we understand why they believe that this is the case, why they think ivermectin will work, then we can actually combat the root of the problem. So, like, I'm familiar with a study that shows that in vitro ivermectin can help kill COVID. Now, the problem is that that's only in vitro, and there's not, you can't have enough ivermectin for it to actually work in your body. It requires special lab conditions and stuff, and that's the reason that ivermectin actually probably isn't that effective. I mean, there could be some research showing otherwise, but I think that study is probably more of the reason why people think that ivermectin works, is because it's been shown to work in vitro. But people don't understand that just because it works in vitro doesn't mean it's applicable in humans.
These are just pivots and misdirections that you're
These aren't
repivoting
pivots.
from the mainstream narrative. Like there is a lot of research that seems to suggest that there may be at least some usages of ivermectin at a minimum as a prophylactic, as well as that it may have positive results.
Do you see utility in the idea of a mainstream narrative?
Do I see utility in the idea of a mainstream narrative?
Yes.
If we didn't have things like the Trusted News Initiative, and we didn't have like the Behavioral Nudge Unit in the UK and things like that, sure. The problem is that one side has too much power and too much influence and too much control of the conversation to
You
the
see
point of it
the
becoming
amount of- You
anti-science.
see the amount of education that's like required to engage, even in conversations like this. Like somebody that is working multiple hours of each day, they have other things to worry about in their effective life until they even get COVID. How are they supposed to sift
fine.
through?
They're
these
supposed to
different
not have
divides?
vaccine mandates, and there's supposed to be an open-ended conversation. And for the people that don't have time to do that, they go talk to their fucking doctor with informed consent and make a decision based off of the best available information that they have. Instead, you have institutions trying to combat misinformation because it doesn't fit whatever their narrative is, and that is absurd anti-science and anti-free speech. That's not how science works. That's not how peer review works. It works in a space of open conversation.
To be fair, though, there
so-
are people
sorry,
who
sorry,
are
sorry.
shopping around for doctors.
Sorry, I got a few people waiting. We got Joe Lewis, and then we got Doobie. And okay, I'm back to GSU and Spawn.
Sure. So I want to tackle like one argument that I continually hear over COVID-19. This is something I keep hearing from righties, and it's really bizarre to me. So it's like the concept of, right, talk to your doctor. If we understand that an overwhelming percentage of Americans, specifically within 2020, excuse me, did not have health insurance, it's very easy for me to come to the conclusion that an overwhelming percentage of the population does not have a doctor they can speak to about COVID-19. I want to like kind of lay that out there and let that marinate for a bit. But I think that one of the traps in this question is that I don't understand why we're talking so much about COVID-19 and all of that shit. Like, I kind of want to pull it up a little higher, right? We understand, like I said in my opening statement, and thank you, Sprawn, for bringing it up, that Spotify does not have a policy around misinformation. Right now, we are participating in arguing about facts concerning COVID-19. That argument about facts of COVID-19, because there's no misinformation policy within Spotify, is not happening on that platform. So you can say whatever the fuck you want on Spotify with no repercussions outside of social media, like being outraged for this. So the question that I asked the panel, do you think Spotify should implement a misinformation policy?
No.
And if the answer is yes, what would that look like for you?
So my answer is no, and this is why. And this is something, and Robert Malone is a very controversial figure. I want to lay it out first. There's a guy on Twitch named Homozygote. I think he's a PhD in some of this research, and he's debunked a couple of things that Robert Malone said. But one thing that Robert Malone said that is important is if people aren't comfortable with guys that have been doing this for their entire lives, for like multiple decades, having objections to some of this, then who the fuck are we comfortable with making objections? So I'm not okay with Spotify having this misinformation thing, because I understand that there have to be professionals that are allowed to give opposition. And if we close them out at every opportunity, when you got shit like Pfizer, I think, or Moderna having the biggest lawsuit in American history, the biggest lawsuit in American history came from the medical misinformation that Pfizer put out. I believe it was Pfizer. Could have been Moderna. Don't quote me on that. But like, if we can see all of these harmful things that have been caused in all these lawsuits that have caused against the healthcare industry, the idea that I'm gonna say that these platforms deserve carte blanche to decide who gets to speak is ridiculous to me.
So I want to push back on that, because it's because I'm not really sure what you're arguing. So I'm just going to ask the question directly. What does a misinformation policy? No, I don't think he's very clear, actually. What does a misinformation policy look like for you? Because right now you are making an argument about a misinformation policy that you have in your head, but I don't know what that is. So can you articulate that?
Yeah, I want to articulate that. I'm making an argument against the idea of having a misinformation policy. That's my argument. My argument that trying to go down that path is, to me, injurious to like discourse in possibly human beings later in life. Like, nothing, if I was a healthcare company, there's nothing more I would want than the entire industry siloing anyone that would mention any critique of anything that I've done and call it medical misinformation, because it's not in line with the research that I funded. Like, I would want nothing more than that. So, and that's what I don't understand in these conversations, where people are pushing to say that the people who make these drugs should have say so, and because they're the people that are going to fund the researchers, they're going to choose them, they're going to scrape the test results and give their report, which is the raw data. Like, they're going to do all these things. So knowing this, if you say the only people that are allowed to critique are people that they fund, is crazy to me.
But
okay, so
even beyond that, man,
can I lay you out my policy and what that would look like, and
Yeah,
see if you might
why-
agree with that?
For sure.
why have like why have a policy because of Joe Rogan and his podcast? Why is that necessary to have a policy that could affect everybody on Spotify, or anybody that's trying to have a podcast on Spotify, when an individual like Joe Rogan had a contract to join Spotify? So why can't they just have individualized contracts with these specific people that are problematic, instead of having a company-wide policy without showcasing that there's a need for a company-wide policy?
Because you can't predict where a policy will be needed, and because Joe
misinformation-
Rogan is 1/20th. Now let's
That's
hear Joe
exactly-
Lewis's.
that's my
Now I want to
exact
hear Joe
argument.
Lewis's.
Can't predict.
Yeah, I want to hear Joe Lewis's policy.
Yeah, me too.
So I believe that if you are a company, in this case, I'm going to function as Spotify, and I understand that Joe Rogan is one of the biggest cash grabs in podcasting, and I would argue in podcast history, I would have to have, knowing the context of his content previously, something within his contract pertaining to misinformation. I think that that is something that Spotify should have done, and they failed to do that. With that being said, Joe Rogan created an opening for other creators to use Spotify as a vehicle to push their content through. Because if I believe that Joe Rogan is one of the biggest podcasts of just like general conversations on the internet, then of course I'm going to want to have my podcast also on Spotify, because maybe by some serendipity, they're going to see what I do and the content is high enough and the guests are high enough and spicy enough that that's going to end up, maybe I get a contract from Spotify and I have exclusive rights. I want to make that clear before I say what I'm about to say in terms of the policy. I believe that, let's say in the case of the letter for doctors, right? They heard a podcast, specifically what they argued in their letter was pertaining to episode 1757 with Dr. Robert Malone. So I'm saying that just for the sake of the audience, not for the sake of us. So I think that letter and the evidence presented in that letter and any type of other information should be sent to Spotify as a means of combating misinformation. I do not believe that Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify unless there are serious multiple violations within his podcast after the point of the contract deal. So everything before that, when he was just on YouTube and JRE.com for a little bit, that you can't like challenge that within the contract deal. But I do believe that if he presents misinformation to his audience, he needs to, if it is proven categorically to be false or misleading, to post some type of correction with the podcast when it goes up. We understand now that these things are no longer live. These things are pre-recorded and then released. So I think it is totally fair on the back end to spend a little bit of extra time on a podcast to make sure their ducks are in the row from the information side when they release that. So they can have something like Joe Rogan says from the jump, at the start of this, X individual, we'll say Alex Jones, said some things concerning this, and that. And you can have that at the front of each podcast when that happens. And then when you go into the podcast proper, you see like, okay, this is what's happened. This is what happened in this episode. So when I get to that point, when Alex Jones starts talking about microchips, and then like as Freemz said, and then like there's this illusion that the government is going to microchip people in the United States, that can be addressed in the open. So when people run into that in the conversation of the panel proper, they go, okay, well, we can move on from that. Finally, with that being said, if it is proven to be a situation where despite that correction and despite the content proper, there's still misinformation for this, I think it's totally reasonable for professionals to come in and put in their insight. So that way there is an additional level of correction that they can easily put in podcast notes.
Well,
To me,
what
I
happens
think
is
that's appropriate.
Who determines what is fake and what is misinformation?
Yeah.
Who gets to determine
team-
what the official
Going to be the
narrative
companies
is
hosting
of the
content
control?
in this case, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're at Twitter or
No.
Facebook and someone's putting something up, you know, like you have.
So
you have
how
a
many
private
people?
company
How
that
many
hosts it or
people
not, right?
died? How many people do you think died out of the 5.5 million or so individuals that, or more or less, that died from COVID? How many people do you think died because the media wanted to stamp down a narrative that this obviously came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology? Now that we know that is
I
the
think that's
predominant
trying
theory,
to force the link there. I mean, I
so
don't.
how many people do you think died? Because we could have
How
had more
many-
information earlier.
I-
That's
many-
funny.
I'm
They
going
would
to
have
guess
caused
zero
more
and
people
I'll
to
own
die.
How
the
many
wrong
That's
individuals
zero.
between the how
Um,
many individuals who are around the age of 24, 25, and 26 are choosing not to get the vaccine because of the misinformation that Dr. Malone presented on the podcast, specifically discouraging the vaccination for young people and children.
Right. So we have
how many people could that influence?
so
Mind
24
you,
and under.
this is-
No, you asked me a question, so I'll fucking answer it. There's less
This
than
nigga hates me, it's
4,000
amazing.
deaths. Well, I mean, it's almost like we have a history of you being a dick. So let's say there's less than 4,000
This
people
is not
under
a
the age.
government-sponsored activity.
There are
I have
less
the right to
than
discriminate.
There are less than 4,000 people who have died under the age of 24 from COVID in America during the entirety of COVID. I asked you a question and then you tried to reformulate the question to a different one to say how this level of misinformation is now wrong. Your ability to control information based off of a narrative might be great in your perfect little utopia until that information is wrong and you've stopped people from discovering the truth for years. Who gets to decide what is the right information that needs to be censored and what is the wrong information that needs to be censored and what is the right information that is the trusted narrative? So for example, I hear a lot of people here saying misinformation, which is that the FDA approved vaccine is available. No, it's not. There's no one in America that can get an FDA approved vaccination. There are specific lots of the Pfizer vaccination that is FDA approved that is being kept on shelves so that they can keep it legal for the emergency use authorization. And we don't even have the documentation from the FDA approval process. And we're fighting court battles to be able to get that earlier than 55 or 75 years. That's just one piece of misinformation that's being spread here. If I ran the platform, would I ban all of you? Would I warn all of you that you're not allowed to say that? Who gets to decide? That's what I want to know.
Sure.
I want to jump in here.
Sure,
because
like,
I totally
I-
would ban all of us.
I can answer
The
that
question
directly
was-
because I can only answer that directly because it appears like Fabian's had to start calling me dad. I have to start paying for child support. So I have to walk my son through this argument. And I'm doing it as slow as I possibly can. If I'm Joe Rogan,
Answer the question instead of being a patronizing.
if I'm Joe Rogan, this is a non-funded, non-government activity, Fabian. I have the right to discriminate against you. So with that being said, Joe Rogan should have a team of individuals whose sole purpose is to make sure that information on the podcast and information presented to the public is as accurate as possible. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Agree.
Utterly disagree. It's evil.
So Joe Rogan getting a team of individuals to help
I agree
fact
with
check
that.
information so that he presents the most accurate information to the public. You don't want him to do that.
No, I think so. Wait,
Just
wait.
wanted to
free
answer your
speech.
argument.
I want to answer this. I want to answer this because Joe, what y'all are doing is y'all are using Joe Rogan to do so much legwork in y'all argument.
He has $1 million contract. Damn it! Are you being a
No,
fucking?
let me finish.
I
Let me
think
finish.
I think that's fair
These-
considering
hold
that
on, hold
Joe
on.
is the
I'll let you
topic
go. I'll
of
let you go. I'll let
discussion.
you go.
Hold on.
It's not
Maybe I heard
necessarily
you wrong.
Joe
Maybe I
himself.
heard you wrong. I'll
Oh,
let you
wait.
go.
No,
I'll
no,
let you
no.
go.
Listen,
I'll let
listen.
you go.
These arguments aren't coming from Joe Rogan. They're coming from industry professionals with several decades of experience that also have teams and people that agree with them. When y'all keep referencing Joe Rogan, you're doing this to put off this like aura that there's a comedian that's refuting what the CDC, Moderna, or Pfizer or anyone else is saying. It's not Joe Rogan, the fucking comedian. It's the damn guest that's on his show with several decades of experience in the topics that they're talking about. So you ask me, should this person that likely came from some kind of team, usually not working alone, coming from some of the most prestigious organizations in America, should they have to have some secondary group to back what they say? My answer is absolutely not. When Fauci gets on TV and there's things that he's walked back, when the CDC director, I can't remember her name right now, starts with a W, when she gets on TV and she's walked back shit, are you saying that the CDC needs an external team to validate everything they say before they go to the
They
public?
already do. They have a team of
Well,
individuals
obviously
before they
they
present.
don't. So,
I'm just
so
asking.
hold on,
Damn it!
hold on.
I'm
So you're
just
saying,
asking for the expansion of Jamie. That's all I'm
Joe-
asking for. He already
but
has
it's
Jamie
not-
to fact check
it's
people
not-
in real time. I'm asking, if
you're do-
anything, to make Jamie's
you're
life
doing
a
it
lot
again, Joe.
easier
Joe.
and expand that. That's all
Joe,
I'm
you're
saying.
doing
And
it
you
again.
don't agree with that. And you
Gambit,
don't
can I
agree with
walk-
that.
no,
We're not gonna.
No, hold on. Joe, you're doing it again because you're bringing up Jamie. Jamie
What am I doing?
can't check this professional that's on the show. Only
So
other
maybe-
professionals can, and that should
Gambit.
happen. And if they disagree,
Gambit.
guess what?
So
They can
sorry,
come on the
we
show.
gotta let Doobie, and Doobie's been waiting a while, and then Wiggle, and Scrawn and Blaine.
Yeah. So I think I wonder if like I can understand like the hesitant I can say the word hesitancy around like having misinformation policies and censorship and this kind of thing. But I wonder if there's like a line because so what was it like? Like a month ago, a few weeks ago, I was on a panel that our friend Fanatic set up. I was invited to go on because he was having Destiny, Gutanks, the PogChamp guy, and this woman, Geisha Montez. And he needed somebody to basically save Geisha and Gutanks from Destiny. And Trihex was on too. He needed somebody to save them from Destiny and Trihex, basically, to make sure that Destiny didn't shit out over them. And he asked me to go on and just try to be that guy, right? To try to like, make sure that he didn't just like walk all over these people.
Paid actor.
I am much more vaccine skeptical. I think the most. I'm sorry, not vaccine. Pro-vaccine than most of you guys. So I went to Scott here actually in his Discourse server, and I was like, "Hey Scott, I'm supposed to go on this panel and try to steelman some of these positions, right? To try to help these people out a little bit."
From the camera.
No, I thought you liked me. What the fuck? That's
Well,
rude.
well,
If you got
why
close
would
to the
you?
camera,
Why
I'd
would you
appreciate it.
accept this? Why would you
Well,
accept this task?
Because I think that
Is this what the battlefield of ideas is about? Is
yeah, I don't. Hold on, I can
steelmanning the worst
explain
argument?
that. I can explain that in a second. Okay, I'm getting there. I promise. So I speak to Scott. He says he has all these resources on his server, a bunch of studies. I go through them. I talk to him about what the typical arguments are, this kind of shit. And then I research that night, and I go on the panel the next day. And when I'm on this panel, I am again, I'm supposed to be the bridge, right? I'm trying to help these people communicate without just like talking over each other, and trying to get them to be charitable toward each other's positions. And at some point during the panel, the anti-vax side starts saying shit like, this is like COVID is a government conspiracy. It's all fake. It's a world government conspiracy to push everybody to the new world order and to control us and control everybody on the planet. And Gutek starts saying insane shit like, oh, he doesn't think that we should have like a drunk driving laws or laws against people walking around naked in front of schools, right? And he just doesn't believe in law at all, apparently. And this woman Geisha Monster starts saying that
get rid of consent laws too.
This woman Geisha starts saying that asymptomatic spread is totally fake. It's a myth. It's never happened. People can't spread any disease with like asymptomatically. So at some point, like I can't help that. Right? Like I can't see him at that position. So so if these people have platforms, right? So if they were on their platforms saying crazy shit like that, right? And they have a fan base that trusts them, right? That's built up a relationship with them over years, right? That trusts these people, and they're saying this kind of crazy shit to this audience. And by the way, we even like asked Geisha, like, hey, what would it take for you to change your mind about this? And literally, like every study she said that came out was funded by this evil government conspiracy, and anything that was like countering that was true. And we asked, okay, well, how do you know that's true? And how do you know you're not the one that's being tricked by Russia or China or other nations that have an incentive to spread misinformation here to cause like instability in our country? And she says she just knows, right? She can just tell. Right? So like I can't convince this person. Like it's impossible. It doesn't seem like she's operating from like a rational position. So if these people have platforms and they're saying crazy shit like this to an audience of hundreds of thousands of people, and these people listen to them and don't get vaccinated, even if they're sick because they think the vaccine is like a nanobots or whatever the fuck, right? Should these people still have the ability to say that on the platform if it might be doing real damage to our country and to the lives of people in this country? Is there a line at all?
No.
Well, I just want to give y'all
there's a line at some point, but
the vaccine came out so long ago that if somebody isn't vaccinated right now, it's not because of the people that are talking right now. They've made their position on getting the vaccine. Nobody listened to the conversation 2 weeks ago and said, I'm choosing not to get vaccinated when they could have been vaccinated for like the last year and a half. No, that doesn't exist, dude.
Even more so, it's the idea that like people in this space, you make your brand the most important thing. Yourself, you sell yourself. People want to watch you. They want to hear what you have to say. And then imagine hearing that on panels, like people go to individuals like Doobie and say, hey, change whatever your opinion is to do this, something that could be damaging to help me and my platform. And then they say that, and then Doobie is put in a position where the people that follow Doobie, the people that think this guy's right, his opinions sound right, I like this guy, they're hearing him say something that he doesn't actually believe. And then what do those people leave with? They think, well, you know what? I might believe this person. And then later on, if Doobie says, that's not what I really believe, I don't really believe it, this is the situation that occurred, what if those people say, dude, you've changed, Doobie. Like, that was the real Doobie, and now you've been like, you've been woke scolded, and the Doobie that I see now is not the real Doobie. And this is why you should always represent your real ideas. You shouldn't be convinced by somebody to go into space and say something that you don't really believe in, and mislead all the people that are like there to see you and your ideas.
Wait, hold on. To be clear, I wasn't misleading anybody, right? So my usual position. I have a high school education, barely a high school education. I literally had to fuck a summer school teacher to get my my diploma, right? Like, unironically. So I barely have a high school education. I don't know anything about these fucking studies. None of you, I think, are qualified to tell me what any of this shit in the studies means. Or any of these big words and the dad and all, like none. I don't know what any of this means. I don't know you guys well enough to trust that you know what that means. Right, so I'm going to go to the experts on these things who spend their lives dedicated to this. We have giant organizations across the planet dedicated to this, and I'm going to listen to whatever the fuck they say about this because that just makes sense to me. Right? But I think so. That's my default position, right? So when this came up, and I was asked to try to steel man and to bridge the gap between the anti-vaxxers and the pro-vaxxers, right? I didn't want to strawman their positions. I wanted to be as fair as possible to the other side. So I went to Scott and I got some of his studies and some of his arguments.
Yeah, we call
and
that
there's my
acting.
research.
That's what method actors do.
Wait, that's
No,
not
that's
acting,
what
that's
you do when
playing
you're being
devil's
charitable.
advocate.
No,
That's-
hold on. That's what you do when you're being charitable to the other side, because just
That's
shitting on
what
these
Leonardo
people,
DiCaprio does when they tell
just
him to play
shitting
a
on these
role.
people closes them off and makes them think that anything you're saying to them is bullshit, because you just don't respect them. You don't respect anything they're saying. You're going to dismiss everything they're saying off.
Why do you need to steal
I don't
man
need-
the opinion of
need we
people?
any more
Why-
need we any more proof that the left is so obsessed with identity that it gets in the way of truth?
Yeah, I think if you want to
Oh,
engage
God,
people
here
on
we-
this honestly and effectively, you need to engage with what they're saying and not just dismiss it because you think it might be crazy.
That's
You
interesting.
disagree.
Like, to be brought into a scenario without a couple of these individuals' consent, in order to steel man their arguments without them knowing so. That's almost like belittling their own intelligence. So to come here and say,
By the end of that, I would
don't have that
absolutely
much
belittle their intelligence.
But then to say, like, I don't have that much of an intelligence myself based on my background, etc., and you guys aren't so qualified, but why would you say that to us and purport yourself in such a manner when you joined that space and you insulted these people's intelligence by joining on their side, thinking that you could steel man their own positions, the ones they believe themselves? And then
I don't think he
Did you,
lied.
wait, did
during
you
that
watch the
debate.
Hold on,
debate?
I
Doobie
think-
totally
wait, one
did do
second.
that. That
Wait,
was
hold on, I
actually
think-
exactly what happened. Doobie tried to explain their positions in a reasonable way, but he couldn't because their positions got too
Right.
unfathomably crazy that he had to like push
So-
back on them a little bit.
Yeah,
Like,
and to be clear, like
Doobie
I think
wasn't
that
spreading misinformation.
yeah, I wasn't spreading misinformation at all. Like, let's be clear, right? So there is some truth to some of the concerns on the anti-vax side, right? Like, or the vax skeptical side that Scott has, right? That I think Scott's been talking about. Some of these concerns are valid, right? And I think that if we're going to be talking about this honestly, in a way that's going to pull people over to my reality, my side, I think we need to engage with them charitably and assume that they're not fucking crazy. By the end of that discussion, I thought these two people were fucking crazy, right? So I couldn't even steel man the shit they were saying. It was impossible, right? And I had to stop a few times and say, hey, just to be clear, you can spread things asymptomatically, right? That's absolutely a thing,
Yeah.
right? I did that multiple times during that, right? Because I didn't want them to misrepresent anything, and I didn't want to be associated with spreading COVID misinformation, right? So, but again. And I
Wait, to be clear,
just really quick to stroke my ego a little bit. So when I said that I had to fuck a teacher to get out of high school, that's true. That wasn't me saying that I'm not intelligent. I think I'm extremely intelligent. I think I am one of the smartest people on the planet, to be honest with you. I just don't know shit about medical data
but
and
Doobie, wait,
studies and how viruses work and how fucking Scott was mentioning like spike proteins. I don't know what the fuck that is, right? So I'm going to trust the experts on it.
Wait,
Like
but
Robert
Doobie,
Malone,
to be
right,
clear,
Doobie?
to be clear, what happened
I hate you.
was Fanatic didn't ask you to join the panel to distort your views. He asked you to kind of
Right.
sort of be a mediator and make sure they weren't dogpiled, right?
You wanted a discussion, not like a fucking flame war debate bro thing where they're getting like shit on constantly. So I tried to like
Okay,
help them
okay.
express their view.
That makes more
Wiggle.
sense to me than
Just
the way
I just
that-
want to be clear. I just want to be clear. One of the reasons that myth is still around is because that was something that the World Health Organization was spreading in 2020 and was something that was considered medical misinformation and had to be taken off of platforms. Was the idea that asymptomatic people could spread the virus.
They
Just
stopped
want to throw
saying
that out there.
like, no,
That's some of the
they stopped
that's some of
saying
the
that by
experts.
February.
I've got a
What
question
were
for
you saying?
Fabland.
They stopped saying that by like February 2020. So
Wiggle, what
No,
were you saying?
even up until June and July, the World Health Organization was
I
still.
said
committed.
that makes more sense to me because it was perceived from my perspective that like Doobie was taking a position that he doesn't really
Yeah,
believe in
wasn't doing
to help
that.
aside, not to be a moderator in a discussion between other individuals.
I'm fine with
To be
matter
clear,
how
sometimes
I think
like,
hold on.
that's-
To be very clear,
I
to be
might
fair to
be like,
Wiggle.
hey, Gambit overtalks people. So hey, Wiggle,
God
go
damn
on
you.
this panel, make sure Gambit, like check Gambit and make sure he's not doing that. It's more like that.
Okay.
Yeah, and trying to like, because these people weren't like debater types, right? So like, I was helping them present their arguments in a way that like made sense. And at some point, they went off the deep end and I couldn't anymore, right? But it'd be totally fair to Wiggle, right? This just like a meta point. It is true that sometimes I do play with or support defend ideas that I don't fully agree with, because I want to see the way that how you guys are or not you guys specifically, but people arrived at opposing those ideas. Right? I want to see their thought process and see if it lines up with mine. Right, and see if people have actually thought these things through, and maybe in the argumentation I'll find something that I didn't have before. Right, so that's why sometimes I will play with ideas. I will devil's advocate sometimes.
Yeah, and that's good. It's the argument that matters, not the person saying it, right? So, like, if Doobie, maybe he's saying things that he doesn't necessarily believe in. Maybe he's taking a premise that he thinks is false to be true, but other people who believe
But
that,
this is
COVID
not true in the
information-
this is not
No,
true
but
in the
this
social
is-
media age. This is not true.
Well, it's true
both that
objectively.
it's both that matter, and it's very clear. I don't know how you can say that as a content creator. Like the things that you say, your viewers will believe. You saying that it's just the argument that matters. If you change your argument tomorrow, perhaps your viewers will change their argument with you just because it's you. And you have that level of power as a content creator. And to not acknowledge that is not acknowledging at least like what the last 10 years.
Right, the
No, I
effect
think it's a fair
somebody
point.
on
has
other
that
is
kind of
true,
shit.
but you have to understand, like, when we're talking about like epistemically accessing the truth, right? That's what I think me and Doobie are very interested
this
in. You're right that we have to be careful how we
this is
present
like a
it.
this is a
but-
bit
This
of a
sidebar is
side
This is
stupid.
a
note.
tangent
Let's go
here.
to Scrawn now, and then Blaine.
Cool. All right. So the earlier question, which I thought was interesting, I don't want to just get into stroking ourselves off of trying to meet people halfway and playing devil's advocate. I think we can actually pose questions like that. So I have a question I want to lead into for Fabian. Sorry. So for
Fabian.
context, we had the
Fabian
question
Liberty.
earlier. Should Spotify adopt a misinformation policy raised by Joe Lewis? We get to the question of social media, free speech here, and I part ways with GSU Gambit here. This brings out more of my economic conservatism. These social media spaces are private platforms, not public. I trust companies to value mainstream science with greater credibility and also to be more mindful of their reputations. Now, that being said, I agree further with Joe Lewis that Joe Rogan could pump up their fact-check crew. That might just be enough. I don't necessarily think Joe Rogan should be banned from Spotify, but also agreeing with him, but the company is within their rights to have a misinformation policy for their
Wait,
image.
You don't disagree
Okay,
with
so
me.
no.
Well,
so,
we're not.
so-
we don't care what they're within their rights.
No,
to. We're talking
so-
about the
Yeah,
morality. right?
exactly. Yeah,
let
don't
me
do that.
continue. Yeah, just let me
Yeah,
continue.
you're
yeah.
basically saying, hey, I think companies have the ability,
No, I think he's
and if
gonna
they
get-
want to
No.
change policy, they can.
I'll-
Nobody
to
cares
be
for
fair,
that
he-
company.
I'll
will-
attack that in my answer.
To be fair, I think he's going to get to that. We just interrupted him, but I just wanted to clarify that that's the
I
No,
just
but
want to lay
let's
this
just
out.
wait
Look,
for
interesting
him.
question
although,
is the moral. But let's let him
yeah,
finish.
so I'm just saying, look, JSU Gambit, just to touch on that, like I can spiritually agree with some of your complaints, but I do have my different position here that I'm just basically clarifying just
That's
where I'm
what
coming
I
from.
understand,
Yeah.
because what you said thus
So-
far,
GSU,
not a
dude.
difference.
Okay. So companies, are entitled to care about their image and everything. This can include Facebook style notices, all that kind of stuff. Taking down select content rather than doing a sweeping ban. That's fine. I'll offer this for the companies just before the question. I think we can push for more even-handedness to appease conservatives a bit more. Companies should do more to flag the lol Ivermectin posts too, which do carry seeds of misinformation. I think they can just put that, hey, you want to know more about COVID, get informed, tag on more of those posts as well. That's what I would say is a good solution for that. Now,
Mhm.
to Fablin, I have a question for you.
Just
Now-
call him Scott. Just call him Scott, please.
Just call
for
me
the love of
Scott.
God.
Yeah.
Scott, you
Okay.
clearly can't say
Call him whatever
Fabian
you
Liberty.
want.
Okay.
Call him whatever you want.
Sure. What problem do you have with these big companies relying more on mainstream approaches? If we could maybe address one or two things in that.
Yeah. So first of all, you're talking about them no longer becoming platforms and them becoming editors, right? Because they're editing the information to determine what they're tagging and changing the way that certain information is viewed. And of course, we know that this almost always comes with some form of algorithmic issues and things of that nature as well, right? So what my problem is massive. First of all, by doing so, I think that they absolutely deserve to lose their Section 230 protections because you're engaging in editorializing information, and I think they should lose their safe harbor, and you should be able to sue the fuck out of Spotify when, let's say, right. So that's part of the issue. I appreciate Problematic Pan telling me that he doesn't like my answer because it's going too far into the legal. But from a moral perspective, when you say they're a private company, right? The problem is that they're deeply enmeshed with the state. And I mean that financially as well, right? When you have things like the Trusted News Initiative, right, that's paying money to companies like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, you know, to help stop the spread of this information. When you have the CIA paying $600 million to Amazon so that they can get your private data from Amazon as well as from Twitch. Everyone that's a Twitch viewer right now, just know that the CIA paid for your information. You know, when you have all of these things, and then you have certain protections afforded to you, and then you have bankruptcy laws and the issues with capital and capitalism when enmeshed with the state is a whole nother side, right? But the problem is that you have people that are in spaces that have institutional power, and you have a much bigger uphill non-free market situation where competitors have a very difficult time being able to do something. So if a private company wanted to lose all of that money and those protections, and they wanted to, let's say that certain things weren't allowed on their platform, I'm all for it. But we don't have that. We don't have a free market where small companies are able to meaningfully compete with these companies. Instead, what you have is the state propagandizing, using its funds and resources to attempt to control a specific narrative, which that in and of itself is also a totally separate moral issue, because there are so many problems with supporting one narrative or one idea just because it appears to be the predominant way that science and things are done. There's no need for it. You just should embrace free speech. You should embrace Enlightenment values and principles and stop going away from the things that made the Western world grow and have so many wonderful things and freedoms. You should simply say, if somebody says some bullshit, people can respond to that bullshit. That's all you fucking need. If Alex Jones says some crazy shit, make a video on YouTube debunking Alex Jones and calling him an idiot. It's really that simple.
Okay. All right.
So I want to just respond to that. So on the moral perspective, that idea of, okay, they're deeply enmeshed with the state. Why not, from the right-wing perspective, focus on the smaller government then? You know, like why trample on company rights when you can just hit harder on, you know, the government?
For all of the reasons that I just gave you. I literally just talked massively about the state issues, and then said for more reason you should protect free speech.
I'm saying just focus on that. Why do you have to complicate your argument by going, oh well, let's just, you know, throw the
because I don't get to be the stockholder place right winger that you want me to be. I have my own ideas, my own audience, my own message.
Hold on,
I think Ron is right.
Can we make one thing clear? I know we're about to go to the other topic, but Scrum, one thing that we need to make clear is none of us are trying to trample on company rights. And I really, really hate when people do this. We're not saying that companies shouldn't have the ability to do this. We're giving our opinion on whether companies should do this. Those are two different things. And I hate when we're having a conversation about how we feel about certain things being enacted. And there's always the wild person that's like, but wait, but companies are private and they should have the freedom to do whatever they want. Of course, we don't care about that. The conversation is over. Would we accept companies making these things, and would we like a world where the companies did make these decisions? It's not about does the company have the right to. So like that conversation is boring. Yes, they have the right.
Yeah, so then let me offer my input on why I think it's probably moral for Spotify to do that, right? I find it to be in Spotify's own best interest that when they're signing $100 million contract with Joe Rogan, they have the responsibility as a corporate entity where if they're able to pay $100 million to have this guy sitting in a chair and talk for a couple hours, I think it's more with, you know, it's absolutely within the realm of possibility that they have an editorial team that's responsible for checking the information that they're spreading on their videos. I think it is the moral thing to do because I'm talking about maximizing, you know, I know and I understand some of you guys may not be utilitarians, but for those of us who are here, I think it's important to understand that when we're talking about the spread of information and the way that, information gets, spread around platforms across the internet, then it's, at minimum, I think it's probably a net positive for Spotify to verify some of that.
Put it in the fucking contract.
Yeah, okay.
This is
I agree.
So Joe Rogan
That's what we're arguing. Should it be in the contract?
Yeah, it should be in the contract.
Yeah, no,
And if it is, then
you
can not sign it.
Yeah,
this is the thing.
If we're talking
this stuff was in this contract. Joe Rogan would still be on
and
YouTube.